Hey guys, this is Snap. Today we're going to be talking about all of the builds we're going to be playing in the upcoming Archnemesis POE expansion 3.17. The manifesto came out a little bit earlier today, and I think now we know exactly what we will be playing on League Start. Some of you might find this premature, but I believe we have seen all of the nerfs that might be affecting us, so I think we have a pretty good idea of what everybody's going to be running at this point. The patch itself is pretty light on nerfs, so not a lot of stuff is changing here, but let's jump right into it. So let's start off with the carry we're going to be selecting for our high-end daily mapping. I think in general you have two good choices here. The first carry is going to be the tried and true Spark Assassin. It is still very good. It's definitely something I would recommend. It's basically the identical build that we ran in Scourge. I'll put a POE for that build in the description. However, if you are a Vaal Soul Gain Prevention Sextant enjoyer, there is another choice we're going to be exploring here, and that is Vaal Blade Vortex. So while the Spark was super great for us last league, we did run into some problems, for example, inside of Lyra Arthane breaches when the pack size got super high, in that the 17 pierces we had built into the character wasn't quite enough to actually penetrate or pierce all the mobs and do enough damage to all the mobs. So we are looking to pivot to an AoE skill, and Vaal BV seems like the best choice to abuse the Vaal Soul Gain Prevention Sextant, so we're building an assassin around that. Just know that if you are not abusing the Vaal Lockout Sextant, Spark is probably a better skill, and if the Sextant either gets nerfed or you don't plan on doing the full juice NEM3 farming with the Vaal Lockout Sextant, then you should probably just go Spark. But with that out of the way, let's get into the specifics of the Vaal Blade Vortex we're going to run. So some quick things about gearing this build. You'll probably notice a lot of gear we're using before, which is Double Nebulous, Incandescent, Southbound, Badge of the Brotherhood, Call of the Brotherhood. Almost all of those items are not replaceable. However, the main thing that differentiates this build from the Spark build is that we're actually dropping a large cluster jewel up here, and we are also going down to the skill effect duration. Skill effect duration is very big on the Vaal Blade Vortex, obviously, because you can get more of them out, and then when you have more of them out, more of them are overlapping, and your clear just goes up substantially. So the small investment here in skill effect duration is pretty big. Additionally, since we're crutching harder on the Vaal Blade Vortex, we're choosing to go with 2 Soul Rippers, as well as the Flask Mastery here, which gives us 5, and 25 flash charges gained, as well as the passive charge gen for the utility flasks. This in turn will charge both of the Soul Rippers, giving us plenty of charges to sling out as many Vaal BVs as possible. Other than that, it should look like a pretty standard spellcasting build for Badge of the Brotherhood. Obviously, we get all the power charges, 1, 2, 3 on the tree. This brings us to 7 power charges on the Assassin. Badge of the Brotherhood gives us 7 frenzy charges. It's all very good damage, no brainer. And then also we are still hard abusing Secrets of Suffering. Somehow this didn't get nerfed in the manifesto, so enjoy your free crit while it lasts. Now, to get the Vaal Blade Vortex rolling at the start of the map, we are opting for a 4-link Stormbrand and or a 6-link Stormbrand, and combining that with a Hubris Circlet with a Horror Essence onto it to get the 30% more damage. Now you can play around with which skill exactly you want to have in the pseudo 5-link/6-link or in the real 6-link, which is in the Incandescent Heart. I think that the Stormbrand on a 4-link with the Horror Essence is going to be more than enough to get your Vaal BVs rolling, especially when you have the flash charges here as well as the passive flash gen on the Soul Rippers. Just know that it is an option to switch around the 4 and the 6-link. Also, if your damage is struggling a little bit at the start, you can also look into taking the Runebinder node. This will increase your single target substantially, but I think with the current setup and the current plans, we don't think this will be necessary to get the build rolling. So in this setup, we've opted for the 4-link Stormbrand. The best links are going to be Cold to Fire, Crit, Swiftbrand, and then Stormbrand. Obviously, this is probably going to be the most bang for your buck on the 4-link. And then if you are going to make this a 6-link, Awakened, Added Lightning, and Peacock are probably going to be your next best links. Here on the Blade Vortex, we've opted for Awakened AoE just for the extra damage. Now, obviously, you could use Anomalous AoE for the extra AoE, but I think the damage here helps a little bit since you are using some links that might not have as many more multipliers as you're used to, so the Awakened AoE is definitely our choice here. Now, while you're dropping the large cluster jewel, you actually have a lot more room to grab ES and stuff on the tree, so this build actually has a little bit more ES than we're typically playing with on carry builds these days. Additionally, we try to jam in its own Defiance banner so it can get a little more armor. I think overall this build is actually quite tankier, one of the tankier carry builds we've played. Once again, it crutches hard on the Watcher's Eye, which is the ES gain on hit. This mod is super powerful, lots of recovery. Definitely jam this into your build if it's like, 6-7x. Very good. Also, since we are converting 100% Fizz to Lightning, you do need this Lightning Mastery here to hit 100% conversion, since the gem only gives you 60 normally, so this will let you hit 100. Other than that, this Mastery also lets us run Ellie Reflect maps. This should be pretty similar gearing, pretty similar pathing to what you've seen on a lot of our carry builds. The main introduction here is going to be the Horror Helmet, because we're going to have a pseudo 5-link with Stormbrand, and then the 6-link is going to be the Vaal BV for the majority of the clear. One other thing to look out for on the belt here is to try to get flask charges gained mod on the belt. This will actually help charge your Soul Rippers even more, which will just equate to more Vaal Blade Vortexes flying out and filling the screen. So one last thing to jam in here on the build is actually an Aziri's Rain. I think that this is actually super good for the Vaal VV. It gives you an 18% chance to not consume any of the souls, or basically regain the souls that you've used. So you can, get a ton more value on the flash charges you are getting from the Soul Ripper, as well as some extra duration, which is super nice. But yeah, that should sum up the carry here. It's just Badge of the Brotherhood converting with Nebulous. Nothing really was touched here. So let's move on to the auras. As you might have seen in the manifesto that was released today, the big thing that got hit here was March of the Legion, which was the boots. Now, March of the Legion wasn't super mandatory for the build. However, you do need to make some adjustments to the gearing of the previous Aurabot POB I released to try and fit everything in. So if you haven't watched the concept of the Aurabot here with the Covenant, I would recommend watching my previous video. That'll give you a good idea about the basics of how this build works. But I'll go over some of the adjustments I made after reading the manifesto, so you can try and get a better idea of the changes I made here. First thing, I think an easy replacement for the March of the Legion is going to be Skyforths. This helps a lot with your life reservation efficiency, which is a hard stat to get. Now, some of you really hate this item because you don't have any life regeneration. However, there is some sources of ES regen, mainly the Mastery, as well as Divine Shield, which I think will be plenty of recovery for most builds. So losing the regeneration off of Zealot's Oath from the life regen conversion isn't as big of a deal as some of you might think. Now that we have the Skyforths on, we can actually move our DPS auras to the gloves, which is going to be the Hands of the High Templar. As you can see here, the +4 Hands of the High Templar has the Generosity, Hatred, Wrath, Malevolence. Now let's quickly go over what happened to March of the Legion and basically the new blessing support they're adding, and why that is useful for the Aurabot that we're going to be building. So before, on March of the Legion, you could fit in 4 auras basically and run those 4 auras on a timer or a delayed buff. Now they are replacing the blessing mechanic on March of the Legion and adding a new support gem. And the blessing support gem changes the skill to cost mana instead of temporarily reserving that mana. Now I believe from how this is worded, it makes it so that this is a mana cost, which means that you can use uniques like Lavianjas or Vaal Clarity to basically bypass the cost of this, which means that if you have either of those things active when you cast it, you should be able to cast it with 0 mana or 0 investment. However, you can only have 1 active at any one time. So we're planning on putting the Vaal Clarity on the Culler, therefore he can use Generosity with it and then give it to all of us, and we can all use our own blessings and have 0 cost auras. That being said, it could not work how we think it is, and if that's the case, this build could easily just drop Malevolence, which isn't a big deal, and then everything will fit just fine without the blessing support. A little bit of duration hurts, but it's okay. So once again, if that blessing support doesn't work like we think it does, basically you just drop the Malevolence here, and instead of having a Zealotry somewhere else with linked to the blessing, you could easily just put it in the gloves here, and once again everything will fit with the Skyforths. However, I'm pretty sure this will work with Lavianjas and or Vaal Clarity to cast the aura, but maybe they thought about that interaction. We'll just have to see. On top of the new blessing support and the boot changes, in order to fit everything in, you do need to make an adjustment to your chest piece setup here. So before I had the triple purities and then the triple flat reservation auras in here, which was precision, clarity, and vitality. Now to fit another 50% aura on your life bar in combination with the Skyforths, you're actually going to need a level 2 enlighten, and then you can link any of the 50% auras that you want inside of your chest. Here I've chosen determination, and with a level 2 enlighten, everything fits, and I have 14 unreserved life. And with those adjustments, basically everything fits as normal without March of the Legion. Basically the only adjustment here is Skyforce is now best in slot, I think, for Aurabots, because now you can run another thing on life. And now the question is, how do you make this Covenant? You're going to need the +2, but also you're going to need it to be 5 linked. It's not an absurd cost for the build. You can Vaal this for +2. It's a very cheap unique. It shouldn't be very expensive for the corruption. And then to 5 link it to fit everything in, you're going to need around 220 Vaal orbs, I think, and 150 fusings to do the bench craft. It is a substantial chunk of the build, but I think Aurabots are just getting more and more expensive with the removal of March of the Legion. So the build went up, but I don't think you're going to find an Aurabot that's cheaper that can run everything without the Covenant. So costs go up. Blame GGG. That being said, almost everything else on the build is identical. It still has the Soul Ripper, coruscating, everything. It still has the Militant Faith with all the duration and stuff. This hasn't really changed. You still have the same amount of overcap. One decision I did make was to try and take the Asylum cluster with the Corrupted Blood cannot be inflicted on you instead of the overcap. I think they're probably about the same. I think if you get the Chaos Res here, it means that your rings don't really have to be as good. You could probably get different bases here, maybe more ES. Just know that you can kind of like, maybe take the Max Res, maybe take some Chaos Res. If you can get Chaos Res on your rings, it's probably going to be better just to grab this Anointed Flesh, obviously. But if you take the Chaos Res here, your rings need to be less good, so it might be easier to set up. And then one quick note about the socket groups here. The reason I have Malevolence in the gloves here is because if you cast an aura or cast something with a duration, it snapshots that duration. So if you were to use Malevolence on the Blessing instead of a DPS aura like Zealotry, if we were to cast a bunch of Vaal Blade Vortexes and my Malevolence just happened to be down because of the timing, basically those Vaal Blade Vortexes would lose out on all of that duration. However, if you put a DPS aura in the Blessing slot, whenever you affect somebody else with that aura, it basically updates their damage numbers even though they've already thrown out the Vaal Blade Vortex or whatever, the damage will update. So I think it's a better choice to probably put one of the less important DPS auras like Zealotry inside of the socket here instead of the Malevolence, which might seem a little worse. Just so you can have that consistency on the duration, especially for Vaal BV, I think the duration is a pretty big stat. So yeah, that should highlight all the changes to the Scion. So basically, mainly the socket groups changed. We put on a Skyforths, and now we pretty much need a 5-link, I think, to be able to fit everything in. Cost went up a little bit, but basically the build is exactly the same. Anyways, let's move on to the Cursebot. There are actually some big changes to the Cursebot that we played. The last one we played in Scourge League was kind of scuffed. We didn't actually invest a ton into our characters because we were hard stuck in white maps, which was fine. But I think now with Mage Blood and Headhunter and stuff in the pool that are only dropping at like eye level 75, I think obviously we're going to go bump up in tiers so we can start to drop those. The main thing on the Cursebot here is we've actually implemented 3 larges into the build here, and the build crutches hard on veteran defenders to get a lot of its ES pool. So if you don't know, the best way to get curse effect on the Cursebot is actually the small notables. This one, Master of Maelstrom, gives you 40% elemental weakness curse effect. Elemental weakness curse effect is the best curse because we are converting 60% cold to fire. We have a split of cold and fire damage, so LE weakness is going to give us the biggest bang for our buck here because we do have split damage. Basically, the largest is Veteran Defender into Master of Maelstroms. There's 3 of them. All the cluster jewels are the same. Obviously, if possible, you want to get some stats here, maybe some strength, maybe some res, whatever you can get. Just some quick benchmarks on the curse effect. We have a 4.06 multiplier on the elemental weakness, which is big. And now we're hovering at around a 2.0 multiplier on all of the other DPS curses, as well as we have an enfeebled temp chain setup, which is at 2.13 for each of them. So we're actually getting some big curse effect upgrades on the Cursebot with this new pathing. Basically, we just grab large cluster jewels, abuse Veteran Defender with Master of the Maelstrom. We're building in some armor, abuse Divine Shield if you can. Divine Shield super OP. These armor nodes are also super OP. You defend with armor while not on low energy shield, also super OP. Try and get all of that stuff if possible. I do have 2 Cobalt Jewels in here. You can try and get res, try and get attributes on these, 8% ES as well. As for the gearing, basically the way that you get super high ES on this is to crutch on a pretty good shield. The Titanium Spirit Shield here, if you get like 320, I think is reasonable for maybe a few X investment, and that will basically skyrocket your ES into like 6,300. There are Cursebots with a lot more ES pool and stuff, but I think getting the curse effect with this amount of cheap gear on is super good. Having a stronger Blasphemy and Enfeebled Temp Chains makes everybody more survivable, so dropping some of the ES that the Cursebot would get personally for stronger curses is definitely worth it. It has an Eye of Malice on because obviously we're cursing the enemy for so much fire and cold pen. When it is increasing the fire and cold resistance to the enemy, it's basically multiplying the resistances into the negatives. Super strong helmet. Just know that if you do roll like a minus curse effect map, you will have to take this off mid map, or else basically all the mobs are like unkillable. So just make sure to watch out for that. The main combo here that I'm using is obviously the Replica Doedrae's Damning for the 30% curse effect. And then basically in order to fit everything in, you're going to want an amulet here with just a +1 curse. This can be literally anything, any dog shit corrupted amulet. Obviously this could have stats on it, could have some ES, could have attributes, could have res, whatever. Just get whatever you can. When you have the Replica Doedrae's on, just keep in mind that it applies 1 fewer curse to your curse limit. So we have -2. So that brings our total curse limit to 1 base, 2 occultists, 3 from Whispers of Doom, and then we have 4 on the amulet. Now, if you do 4 - 2, we have 2 curses total that we can run on the Blasphemy, which is Enfeebled Temp Chains. Obviously, you want the defensive curses here. And then in the chest piece, there's a line that reads, Hexes from socketed skills can apply 5 additional curses. So you put all of your offensive curses in the totem. So you have 2 defensive ones on Blasphemy. The rest of them go in the totem, and you just throw totems around. This isn't super necessary to have in a 5-link. It's just extra curse effect if you do have the enhance, but it's not super necessary. Now, you might know we don't have enough curses to actually run a mark here. However, the person who's playing the Cursebot in our party, MP, really likes using Vaal Cyclone here. He thinks it's really fun. So in order to get that to work in a culling setup, we unfortunately have to wear Southbound. northbound. That is the only way to make it work. And then if you wear southbound, you also take Ancestral Bond, and you basically can't kill anything. Now, you don't have to wear southbound. If you don't want to Vaal Cyclone, then great. You can just put on a rare pair of gloves. This is also going to put your ES at 7k, which is super healthy. Alternatively, you can put on +1 curse gloves in the form of a Vixen's Entrapment, and that will let you cast the mark if you need to. So those are a few options in the glove slots you can look into if you don't want to wear the southbounds. But I think Vaal Cyclone's pretty fun. It's a super fun skill. Try it out. As for the other gear here, basically you have boots for res, strength, dex. Typically, Cursebots will struggle for resistances and or attributes. And so maybe switching out Syntrex for a pair of rare boots that you can get strength dex craft on. Additionally, the belt, you're just looking for attributes and res and ES as much as you can get. Just know that the shield here, you want it to be the highest amount of ES possible because these nodes here, which is Arcane Guarding and also Veteran Defender, scales really, really, really hard off of the shield. So you want to kind of maybe not get as much res and maybe just go high ES as possible on the shield so that your ES pool is super healthy. You can see here if I remove this shield here, you go from 6.7k ES to 4.4. Big yikes. So make sure if you're going to spend a little bit of money on the Cursebot, get a big shield. The big shield really carries the ES here. And let's move on to the Mana Guardian. This is probably the build that changed the least, to be honest. This build is identical to basically what it ran before. This build isn't super duper duper optimized. It's only sitting at like 16k mana. However, it does have capped block, which is a big thing. Since this build is going to be running the link to give everybody capped block, protective link here, it has to invest a little bit into block nodes as well as grabbing glancing blows. But basically this will give the entire party capped attack block, which is super nice. It also is super tanky on its own. Abuse Divine Shield, get an Aegis Aurora, stack some armor. It's going to be pretty unkillable. If you want to keep this build cheap, I would definitely copy this build, this pathing. However, just know that there is a big ceiling on the Mana Guardian involving a bunch of split personalities. The split personalities on top of in-stacking can definitely push this build to like 20-30k mana, but this is a pretty good baseline to get started. Super tanky with the Aegis, gives everybody capped attack block. 16k could be better, but as usual, it has the shock cap from this mastery because you have so much ink mana. You throw a Vaal lightning trap here, and it basically shocks everything with max effectiveness. Super easy. It's getting Tempest Shield for its own spell block. It can fit Purity of Elements and Determination for ailment immunity, and also its own armor for the Divine Shield. Yeah, this build is super straightforward. Just get some mana, cap the block. Super good build. Highly recommend. Moving on to the Culler here. This is a snapshot from the Culler we had in the Scourge League. This build basically didn't change at all. However, we did figure out something that was super cool in the gem links that I highly recommend it for anybody that's going to be going for a culling setup. Now, as you know, we are Vaal Soul Gain Prevention Sextant enjoyers. So basically we turned on Corrupting Fever. You want to put increased duration, item rarity in a 3-link, and the way you proc that is actually Vaal Ice Nova. You can also put Vaal Ice Nova with culling, rarity, and AoE in another 4-link. And basically what this does, if you've never used Vaal Ice Nova, basically it's huge chains, it affects huge AoE, and because we have the Lockout Sextant, you can fucking spam this thing. You can spam it so hard, you crash the server instantly. So you gotta be a little bit conservative with it, but if you push the button, basically it affects all the mobs on screen, and then also it affects everything with a degen Corrupting Fever. So the whole screen is being tagged by your bleed. You have it linked to rarity, you have it linked to rarity in the Vaal Ice Nova, so you have gigantic coverage on the Culler, which feels super nice. Now on top of that, we still are using the Kinetic Bolt just for some residual attacks. I mean, obviously it's a pretty good setup if you just attack with a Kinetic Bolt, but I think it makes the 6-link a little less necessary, so you don't need to get some crazy colors on your Greed's Embrace if you don't want to. You can definitely just use the Ice Nova and the Corrupting Fever. Definitely highly recommend this tech. Very good. One other thing we decided to jam on here was a Tempest Shield, just giving him some spell block. Also Vaal Molten Shell, super good. Make sure you're using this big defensive layer. But other than that, the build is basically identical. And last but not least, the brand new technology. Call this the minor support, okay? In terms of the minor support here, the two main things that this build is providing is just gigantic damage in the form of Stormblast Mine and also high impact mines. Now, Stormblast Mine has a line that reads, each mine applies 3% increased damage taken to enemies near it up to a maximum of 150%. Now, this is increased damage taken, which is basically a more multiplier. Very big stat to have on any sort of party build. The other thing that this build tries to maximize is high impact mine. Now, high impact mine has a line that reads, each mine from supported skills applies 2% chance to deal double damage to hits against enemies near it up to a maximum of 100. Now, if we can max out these buffs, we're going to have 150% increased damage taken plus 100% chance to deal double damage, which is just like insane damage in a party. So there's a few things you can do to try and maximize your aura effect as well as the aura effect on the enemies. The main one is the Master of Command Small Cluster Jewel, which rolls on efficiency smalls. This build takes 3 larges and grabs 6 total Master of Commands. This gives us a total of 90 increased effect of non-curse auras from your skills on enemies. On top of that, we're grabbing a little bit of aura effect on the tree, influence as well as sovereignty over here. The larges we tried to jam disorienting display in when you throw the Stormblast mine and you throw the flame wall mine down. This basically is a screen-wide blind, which is very, very large AoE, which is much better than the very small blind that Sabo gets in comparison. It's also very tanky just because it has the 50% reduced damage taken from blinded enemies. The reason to go Sabo on this build is just that it has a really, really easy transition from a leveling build. There's a ton of strong choices on Shadow, Poison Helix, any sort of mine trap. You also get a fuck ton of AoE from Sabo, which helps with the mine coverage, as well as the 150% effect of auras from mines. That's a no-brainer, right? So if we take a look quickly at the aura effect on our Stormblast mine, for example, we are sitting at 4.06. Keep in mind that this value of 4.06 does not calculate the Master of Command Small Cluster Jewel because it is an aura effect on the enemy. You can see how if I unspec this, the aura effect stays the same. So you're going to need to add 90 plus 15 from our Anoint, which is Bannerman, 15% effective non-curse auras on your enemies. So we need to add 105 aura effect to any calculation that shows up here so we can get an accurate number. So the breakpoint we're trying to hit here is 500%, or sorry, a 5.0 multiplier. This makes it so each Stormblast mine here has a 15% increased damage taken near it. Therefore, we need to throw exactly 10 Stormblast mines in order to hit the cap of the Stormblast mine debuff. This is pretty convenient because the minefield support lets us throw 4 additional mines at a time, which means 5 per throw, and that means that you have 2 throws of the mine and you're at the cap for the increased damage taken. Now let's look at our high impact mine setup, which we chose Flame Wall. The reason to go Flame Wall here is it is the lowest mana cost skill that can be supported by a mine. Because the mines do reserve some amount of mana, you want the lowest level as well as the lowest mana cost skill available, and that just happens to be Flame Wall. You're never actually detonating the mine, so it doesn't really matter what skill you choose here. You just want the one that costs the lowest amount of mana and the lowest amount of reservation, and always keep it at level 1. Our aura effect on the Flame Wall here is 3.46. Once again, we need to add 105 aura effect here because of the small cluster jewels as well as the Anoint. The breakpoint we are trying to hit here is 4.5. If we hit a 4.5 multiplier, you can see here the high impact mine is going to have 9% increased chance to deal double damage to hits against enemies near it. We have linked minefield here, obviously, is for the 4 additional mines, so we throw 5 per throw, but also we have swift assembly here, so it has a chance to throw 1, 2, or 3 additional traps or mines. With the current setup, the high impact mine is not quite capped if we throw only 10. Obviously, we're going to be at 90% chance to deal double damage, but if we proc maybe 1 or 2 of these swift assemblies per throw, then obviously we will be at the cap of the high impact mine. So maybe you don't get it 100% of the time, but it should be pretty consistent in getting this swift assembly to throw an additional mine. But that should be the basics of this particular build in terms of the damage it's bringing. Now, there is a lot of additional utility to jam in on a build like this. One of the things we are implementing is the Venomous body armor, as well as trying to reserve the Venomous aura aspect of the spider. This gives you 10% reduced damage to enemies affected by the spider webs, as well as extra penetration, which is super, super nice. The gearing here on this character, some of the mandatory uniques obviously is the Wakatuki, and the Jinx Juju and the Venomous, I think, are all mandatory. In terms of the other items, the weapon can be any one-handed weapon that has throwing speed on it, and then you can look for as much resistances and or attributes as possible. So basically look for throwing speed, or you can even craft throwing speed and then look for as much resistance and or attributes as you can, since you don't really care about anything else here. The helmet enchant basically, I think, needs the enchantment of the Stormblast mine 40% aura effect. This lets you hit the breakpoint, so you only have to throw 10 mines. You can also craft throwing speed on here, get some ES. This should be pretty self-explanatory. Gloves just get any amount of ES as well as res attributes. Syntrek is replaceable. You can get a pair of rare boots with res attributes, whatever, but I think Syntreks are super, super, really, really good with this evasion energy shield mastery node. I think it's just such value for the amount of money that you spend, like 1 2C on a pair of Syntreks, so I think we always go with that. Rings basically basically they're just any CI build support rings. You just get as much res, attributes, ES, and then also you're going to need an open craft here, or not an open craft, sorry, an open affix here to get the aspect of the spider. You can put it on either of your rings or your belt. The belt can also roll trap and mine throwing speed, which is a super good stat, means you can get your mines out faster. Additionally, a super good place to get throwing speed is going to be on cobalt jewels. This build only has one, unfortunately, but there definitely is room to maybe drop some ES and get some of these cobalt jewels in here and just get mine throwing speed and ES and stuff on them. So there's definitely room if you are a higher level or you want to drop some ES to try and get more throwing speed. This is also the chosen build for the Animate Guardian. The AG gear is located here in the item sets. Basically, it is the one that is wearing the Kingmaker. We're trying to relegate the Kingmaker to the Animate Guardian, even though it might not be super optimal in terms of coverage. I think the support builds are losing a little too much over time to justify maybe using a Kingmaker on somebody. I think the Cursebot gets so much more powerful if it doesn't have to use the Kingmaker, so it just makes sense to try and throw it on the AG. Master the Stitch Demon, obviously this is really insane on Animate Guardians. If you've seen Animate Guardians before, this basically makes it unkillable. Garby the Ephemeral, so you're not stuck in the Delirium Tar. Southbound, so it doesn't kill stuff. It also gives it a little bit of life. And then Victario's Flights for a little bit of movement speed. I don't think this AG will die. However, in the event that for some reason it's just getting one shot or whatever, or it's just dying or despawning, whatever, and we are just dumpstering our money, there is a version of this build with no Animate Guardian that does make it so this build wears the Kingmaker, goes down about 1,000 energy shield. It does fit everything in. So this is basically the contingency plan if the Animate Guardian is dying. If not, you can use the unkillable AG. Make sure to switch your passive tree. There's two different trees here if you have an Animate Guardian or no Animate Guardian. So take a look at both of those. Last thing here on a lot of the support builds, I have done my best to try and jam in Determination and Defiance Banner on as many builds as possible for personal PDR and tankiness. I think PDR is like super fucking OP. Determination, Defiance Banner, if you can jam it in, makes your build like almost unkillable. Super, super big defensive layer. This build is also running a haste here. So because we're running Vaal BV, you don't really scale as much off of cast speed. Because it is a Vaal skill, it has a set hit rate on the Vaal BV. So we've relegated the haste aura over to our secondary support or flex support because it is getting some of the aura nodes here. So it just makes sense to throw it on this build if possible. Other than that, a lot of the other utilities should be pretty familiar here. Vaal aura is set up with Molten Shell. Everybody should be running that if possible. It's got the Spider, Discipline, Determination, Defiance Banner. It's got pretty much everything it would need. Now, I've seen some promising builds that involve using Soul Link as your flex support. I'm going to leave POBs to some example Soul Linkers if you're interested. In my opinion, those aren't worth playing until you hit a certain threshold of investment. This build we're going with here is super duper cheap, but also increases our damage like 4x, 5x. So I think we're opting to go with this so that we can maybe get worse gear and play with more damage that way. The Soul Linker is Giga defenses. It's just maybe costs a little bit more. I'll leave POBs to both of them if you want to look at the linker supports. I want to shout out Viral for helping me with the linker POBs. He gave me some good ideas, regarding like, how we might build those linkers. He also built a really scuffed version in Scourge that we tried out for a few maps. It definitely seems like it has some potential. It's just in my mind that the cost to make it comfortable might be a little bit too high for our budget, so we're trying to avoid that for now. But it definitely has potential. And then just quickly going to go through this low budget linker idea that I had. We will not be playing this in the upcoming Archnemesis League. I just wanted to quickly go over some ideas I had here regarding the Soul Linker. Basically, the whole idea of the build is to use Soul Link, obviously, which is damage from hits against the things that you're linking goes to you instead of them. So you're basically soaking the damage of all of your party members. They also take less damage when you've linked them. And so if you link all your party members, get a fuck ton of energy shield and also a lot of ES regen, you can start basically becoming a true tank for your party. I tried to make this super duper budget. I hit 12k with a very, very low amount of investment. It also has an incandescent heart, so it's converting LE to chaos. So you're just basically taking 25% LE off the top. It's got around 20k armor with no flask, so it's a pretty good benchmark here. And then also I have a Blight Well on for super amount of ES recharge. Now, this gear is super duper cheap and budget. It just has some cluster jewels here with ES, with Savor the Moment, has Veteran defenders, which are pretty easy to obtain and or craft. Other than that, the build actually has pretty much nothing on it, and you're able to hit 12k. And this would be like an entry point to the build. With the Mana Guardian in the party, we're going to be sitting at 25k. Now, if you're actually going to be investing in this build, the route to go is definitely to start instacking. If you start instacking on all of your gear, you just start getting percent attributes on stuff, you can easily get into like 20k, 25k solo, and then you're going to be getting like maybe 35, even 40k in a party. And at that point, the defenses that this linker brings is actually pretty crazy because you can start to soak damage for everybody. On top of that, the mana cost on the Soul Link is pretty much zero because you have this linked inside of a Vortex. The Vortex has it so socketed gems have 50% reduced mana cost. And then on top of that, you link it to Inspiration. It costs like 5 or 10 mana or something per person. So the mana cost is very, very, very manageable. Also, this build builds in the Duration Mastery. So your Soul Link is going to be lasting 36 seconds. Now, one last meme for this linker support idea we've been tinkering with. I think eventually the really crazy thing you can do is build a Coruscating Elixir Ivory Tower build, and you go Scion Pathfinder and or use a Trader Keystone on a Brutal Restraint Jewel so you can have 100% uptime on the Coruscating Elixir. I think if you were to do that and reserve all of your life, you can start to maybe get a crazy amount of ES, and you just go low life at that point. One thing to know about the Soul Link here is that it actually can't kill you because the link only takes from your energy shield. If you have a little bit of life pool left, if you're going like Ivory Tower, maybe leave yourself 1k or 2k life left. Basically, the ES is the only thing that's going to be taking hit. So if your teammates are all standing in, for example, a Detonate Dead, all of your ES will be deleted, but you won't die. And you have a little bit of room to play with that 1 or 2k life so that you can maybe have a little bit of a buffer to regen that back up. Not to mention the crazy amount of ES you can actually push using an Ivory Tower build. This build isn't nearly optimized, it's just some ideas I had. I'll put down both the POBs if you guys want to experiment with them. I'm excited to see what kind of directions that the linker can take. Surely somebody can optimize this and make it a lot more crazy than I can. It's just some ideas I had. I think it's super, super strong, has some potential, but I think for us, the cost to try and get all of this set up doesn't make sense for us, as well as, unfortunately, you can only use one link at a time. If we are going to be using a Soul Link, that means that we are going to be missing out on the block cap, which the Mana Guardian already provides. And so for us, the trade-offs versus like how much the investment is, it just makes sense for us to take the damage route on the miner just to try and make it super duper cheap. There's one last quick topic to talk about, and that is what do you play in a 2-man or a 3-man or a 4-man, 5-man or 6-man? Now, the obvious choice for me is if you are in a duo, you play the Scion Orabot that I built, and then you play the Spark carry, or you can play the Vaal Blade Vortex carry if you're planning on abusing the Sextant. But please do not play that character if you're not abusing the Sextant. That character is going to suck if you don't have the Sextant. Otherwise, go Spark. It is still super, super powerful. Great build. Highly recommend. Now, if you're adding a third person to your party, I think obviously it's a no-brainer. Add the Cursebot, the amount of penetration, the slow, the enfeeble, everything. Third person, always the Cursebot. We're kind of going back to original support rules here now that we're able to fit everything in on one Orabot character. Fourth would obviously be the Mana Guardian or the Culler, depending on what you guys are doing. If you want to just push crazy triple beyond and a lot of your income is coming from the Nemesis 3 Sextant, then you can justify maybe just having the fourth person be defensive as the Mana Guardian. However, there are arguments to be made that you could fit in a fourth as your Culler and run low tier white maps and just farm uniques. That's a personal choice. There are definitely two different routes on your fourth person to the party, so that's definitely one thing to think about. The fifth person would be the person you didn't add as your fourth. So basically, if you didn't have a Culler, you can add a Culler as your fifth, and if you did have a Culler, then you add your Mana Guardian as your fifth, and the sixth person is obviously going to be that flex support role. You can be the miner support, you can do a Soul Linker. Honestly, there's a lot of choices in the flex support role. I think both of those are super strong options, although if you're trying to keep your costs down like we are, I would look into going the Sabo support, just because one, you can have an amazing league start and just start with poison and or mines and or traps, whatever skill is best, and then you can have a super easy transition. You don't even need to switch ascendancy here if you're playing a Sabo, so you can get into the delirium maps a lot faster. That being said, I do think that the Soul Linker is probably best if you invest heavily into it because you're probably going to be unkillable in that scenario. We still don't have patch notes, but if anything does change substantially from the manifesto to the patch notes, I'll be sure to make an update video like I did for Scourge, just because in between Scourge there was a lot of random changes that they didn't mention in the manifesto. If there are similar changes that affect our builds in sweeping ways, I'll be sure to make an update video, but I think this should serve as a good baseline here for all the builds we're playing, so I hope this has been helpful for you guys. That should go over all the builds builds, all of the memes, all of the updates and stuff through the manifesto. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to leave comments. I try to go through as many as I can and answer you guys if you're not asking the same question a million times. So yeah, thanks for all the support. I do stream on Twitch every league start. I'll probably be streaming the announcement if you want to hear our thoughts on all of that stuff. But I hope to see you guys on the release of the Archnemesis League. Once again, I'm Snap, and thanks for watching.